Hi there, and welcome back to Choose Better Living. This is the space where you and I explore ideas that help us understand ourselves, live with more intention, and become a little better every day. Now, let's begin with today's book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. When you and I look back at human history, it is almost unbelievable how far we have come. About 2.5 million years ago, humans were nothing more than a late-arriving species. We were small, fragile, and completely unknown. Our impact on Earth at that time was no greater than the impact of jellyfish or gorillas. Even though we have only been here for a very short moment compared to the full length of Earth's history, we have gained more power than any other species. No other creature has ever come close to the level of dominance that we hold today. And that naturally raises a question. How did all of this even happen? Admired by Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, and now one of the best-selling history books in the world, Sapiens offers a sweeping story of how our species came to rule the planet. In this episode, I want to walk with you through some of the key ideas in this journey. Together, we will explore the major forces that shaped humanity. From the development of language to the invention of money, these forces have led us to where we are now. As you listen, you will also discover why agriculture was not as wonderful as many of us imagine, and may have even made life harder. You will hear why writing systems were created and what their purpose was. And you will learn why the last few decades have been some of the most peaceful in human history, and how all of this connects to our ongoing search for happiness. Before we get deeper into the story, let me tell you a little about the author. Yuval Noah Harari was born in Haifa, Israel in 1976. He earned his doctorate at the University of Oxford in 2002 and now teaches in the Department of History at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He is especially interested in world history, medieval history, and military history. His current research focuses on big, fundamental questions. For example, what is the relationship between history and biology? What separates Homo sapiens from all other animals? Is there justice in history? Does history have a direction? And are humans actually becoming happier over time? His book Sapiens became a global publishing phenomenon. It has been translated into more than 30 languages and recommended by leaders such as Barack Obama, Bill Gates, and Mark Zuckerberg. Before we get deeper into the story, let me tell you a little about the author. Yuval Noah Harari was born in Haifa, Israel in 1976. He earned his doctorate at the University of Oxford in 2002 and now teaches in the Department of History at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He is especially interested in world history, medieval history, and military history. His current research focuses on big, fundamental questions. For example, what is the relationship between history and biology? What separates Homo sapiens from all other animals? Is there justice in history? Does history have a direction? And are humans actually becoming happier over time? His book Sapiens became a global publishing phenomenon. It has been translated into more than 30 languages and recommended by leaders such as Barack Obama, Bill Gates, and Mark Zuckerberg. Now, let us go back to the beginning, when humans were still ordinary animals. For millions of years, we were nowhere near the top of the food chain. Our status was not very different from insects like ants. Yet at some point, we rose to the very top. Imagine the early morning of human existence. It is as if humanity stretched its body, looked around, and wondered, where did everyone else go? More than 2.5 million years ago, humans were insignificant creatures. Our influence was far weaker than the influence of bees or even jellyfish. Although Homo sapiens had large brains, walked upright, used tools, and lived in complex social groups, other human species did the same. Neanderthals, for example, could hunt large animals and mastered the use of fire long before Homo sapiens became dominant. Today, things look very different. We have become the rulers of the planet. We have even reached beyond Earth and started exploring new horizons in the universe. But how did we accomplish all of this? To understand that, we need to go back to the early stages of human evolution. The earliest humans appeared around 2.5 million years ago in East Africa. They evolved from a large primate known as Australopithecus. These early humans, such as Homo rudolfensis and Homo erectus, left East Africa in search of new lands. As they adapted to different environments, they gradually evolved into different human species. Homo neanderthalensis lived in Europe. Homo erectus lived in Asia. Homo soloensis lived on the island of Java. Homo sapiens, the species you and I belong to, did not appear until about 300,000 years ago. Although these different species lived in various ways, evidence shows that they also interbred. When scientists mapped the genome of Neanderthals, they found that people of European ancestry today still carry a small percentage of Neanderthal genes. One explanation is crossbreeding. Homo sapiens mated with other species, especially Neanderthals, and gradually blended with them. Another explanation is the replacement theory. It suggests that Homo sapiens drove the other species toward extinction because of small advantages in skills or tools. We may have taken their food sources or simply killed them. Most likely, both explanations are partly true. Homo sapiens wiped out other human species through both violence and interbreeding. To understand why Homo sapiens became the only surviving human species, we need to talk about something called the cognitive revolution. About 70,000 years ago, the human brain experienced a major leap. This change in the structure of the brain gave our ancestors a new level of thinking. They created more advanced tools and began early forms of trade. With this new ability, Homo sapiens could find food even in harsh environments. This gave them a clear advantage over all other human species. During the first encounters between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, the Neanderthals were actually the winners. About 100,000 years ago, when groups of Homo sapiens first reached the Levant in the eastern Mediterranean, the climate and diseases were too harsh. They could not survive for long. But after the cognitive revolution, everything changed. Sapiens began working together in larger groups and hunted nutritious large animals. They made clothing and shoes from animal skins and fur to survive the cold. This new mental power allowed them to spread almost everywhere on Earth. They moved from Africa into Europe, Asia, and even Australia. Along the way, sapiens left behind a trail of extinction. Mammoths disappeared. Many smaller mammals vanished. Birds, and even some parasites were wiped out. But this revolution had a price. Homo sapiens traded physical strength for mental power. Our brains grew larger and required more energy, but our muscles became weaker. Walking upright and using our hands for delicate tasks came with long-term issues like back pain and neck problems. Women paid an even higher price. Standing upright made their pelvis narrower, but human babies had larger heads. This made childbirth extremely painful and dangerous. Nature responded by favoring earlier births, which is why human babies are born far less developed than other animals. A baby antelope can run within hours. A kitten can hunt within weeks. But a newborn human is fragile and helpless. Because the mother cannot find food on her own during this period, she needs the support of the entire social group. This is one reason early human communities became so close and cooperative. And this deep dependence on the group shaped something else that would later define our species. It pushed us toward richer forms of communication. When you and I talk about language, it is natural to wonder what makes our language so different from the simple calls of birds. Long before humans developed anything close to the languages we know today, early people probably communicated through rough and basic sounds. Animals communicate too. Even insects like bees and ants share information. A monkey can warn the others by shouting something that means a lion is nearby, and the whole group will hurry up a tree. A parrot can repeat every word Albert Einstein once said, even though it has no idea what those words mean. So, what makes human language so special? It is not the sounds we make. Whales and dolphins produce sounds our ears cannot even hear. The most widely accepted answer is that human language is incredibly flexible. With only a limited set of sounds and symbols, we can create an unlimited number of words and sentences, and each sentence can carry a completely different meaning. A monkey may only be able to say something like a threat is coming, but a person can tell her group that she saw a lion by the river this morning following the tracks of a herd of buffalo. With language, she can describe the exact location and work with others to come up with a strategy to drive the lion away so they can hunt the buffalo and avoid a deadly predator. In the same way, if someone found a place full of fresh fruit, that person could tell others exactly where it was. There is another theory that language evolved because people needed to share information about the world around them. According to this idea, humans are social animals. We survive and reproduce by cooperating. Language may have developed because people spent so much time talking with each other. They did not just talk about lions or buffalo. They also talked about who was involved with whom, who could be trusted, and who behaved badly. This kind of communication helped early groups strengthen their internal bonds and expand their territory. Through language, Homo sapiens shared more than facts about the physical world. They could imagine together and talk about abstract ideas such as gods, history, and human rights. These ideas are sometimes called myths, not because they are false, but because they exist only in the human mind. They are the creations of our imagination, made possible by language, and they became the foundation of human civilization. By sharing beliefs about religion, identity, or freedom, people formed communities that grew larger and more organized. This ability to create shared culture also helped humans survive and multiply. Early humans lived in small tribes of no more than around 150 members. But language and imagination allowed communities to grow far beyond that size. Small groups became villages, villages became towns, towns grew into city-states, and eventually those city-states formed the nations we know today. As humanity spread across the planet, people moved from hunting and gathering to farming and raising animals. This shift, often called the agricultural revolution, changed everything. For most of our existence, we lived as nomads, always moving to wherever food was most abundant. Early humans gathered wild fruit and hunted animals. They did not stay in one place. Then, about 12,000 years ago, things began to change. Instead of relying entirely on hunting and gathering, people began to plant crops and domesticate animals. Within about 2,000 years, most humans were farming. This was a massive transformation. Farming required far more time than hunting and gathering. A hunter could gather enough food for the day in a few hours. A farmer worked from sunrise to sunset. The quality of early crops was poor as well. The first grains were hard to digest and lacked important nutrients. Compared to the variety of meat, nuts, and wild fruit eaten by hunter-gatherers, early farming diets were narrow and limiting. People who hunted and gathered did not worry much about the future because they could always move somewhere else if food ran low. Farmers, however, had to stay in one place to tend their fields and wait for the harvest. So, why did humans choose this path? The shift from nomadic life to farming did not happen overnight. Each generation settled a little more than the one before it. Farming needed more labor, so people stayed longer in one place and slowly became tied to their land. By the time historians understood the downsides of agriculture, humanity was already deeply committed to it. Sedentary life allowed people to create new ideas such as laws, individual rights, and organized social structures, which helped societies become more stable. Although farming created many problems, it had one overwhelming advantage. It produced much more food on the same amount of land. Farmers could grow more edible crops in a smaller area. This increased food supply allowed populations to grow rapidly. It led to stored food, richer communities, and the invention of something essential for trade: money. As societies expanded, cultures around the world developed their own distinct traits. During the first half of the 20th century, Scholars believed each culture had a fixed essence that would not change unless influenced from the outside. They studied cultures like Samoa or Tasmania as if those cultures were made of stable beliefs and values that shaped the people who lived there. Today, cultural researchers see things differently. They argue that cultures constantly evolve. Each culture has its own beliefs and standards, but these ideas change all the time. A culture adapts to its environment or to contact with neighboring cultures. Picture a man in medieval Europe. He was a Christian, but he also lived by the code of chivalry. In the morning, he might sit in church listening to a sermon about humility and peace. That same afternoon, he might put on his finest silk clothing and attend a lavish feast at a lord's castle, where he and the other guests bragged about violent battles and told crude jokes. These contradictions were never resolved. In fact, they helped shape movements like the Crusades, which attempted to merge Christian values with the warrior spirit of knights. Even though medieval culture failed to fully combine these ideas, that was not a flaw. It was a driving force behind cultural energy. Every culture contains conflicting beliefs and values. People feel pulled in different directions, and this tension is part of what keeps cultures alive. Without these contradictions, humanity might never have built or maintained any culture at all. Over thousands of years, many small cultures merged into larger ones. Most humans lived within a single vast world that connected Asia and Africa. Only a small minority lived in 4 other cultural worlds of significant size. One was the Mesoamerican world, which covered most of Central America and part of North America. Another was the Andes world along the western side of South America. A third was the Australian world across the continent of Australia. The fourth was the Oceanic world, which included many islands across the Southwest Pacific Ocean, from Hawaii all the way to New Zealand. As these worlds interacted, something else became essential: trust among strangers. That is where money comes in. Imagine a man who grows apples and wants a pair of sturdy shoes. He tries to trade apples for shoes, but the shoemaker does not want apples. The shoemaker wants a divorce. The apple grower then finds a lawyer who does enjoy apples and proposes a 3-way exchange. But what happens if the lawyer suddenly wants a haircut instead? This problem is why societies created money. Before coins or paper bills, people used many different things as money. They traded items like shells, livestock, hides, salt, grain, beads, fabric, or written notes. Even in modern prisons, inmates still use cigarettes as a form of currency. Money not only allows people to trade goods, it lets them store wealth. A farmer who wants to move to a new home cannot take his land or his house with him. But he can sell both and carry the value with him in the form of money. Because money can be exchanged, stored, and transported so easily, it became a powerful tool for building complex trading networks and dynamic markets. The value of money does not come from the chemical structure of a shell or a piece of paper. It comes from our imagination. Money is a psychological phenomenon. It represents the trust that we place in one another. For example, imagine an old man who is willing to sell his house and his farmland in exchange for bags filled with shell money. He does it because he believes he can use those shells to buy another house, more rice, and even new fields when he moves to a different place. Without this belief, global trade networks would hardly function at all. Gold is a perfect example. It opened a completely new path that allowed European merchants to buy silk, porcelain, and spices from the East. When you look at how money actually works, you see that it relies on 2 basic principles. The first is wide-ranging exchangeability. The second is wide-ranging trust. These 2 principles allow strangers to work together effectively in trade and production. Yet, they also slowly erode personal relationships and human values because they replace them with the forces of supply and demand. Even though money builds trust between strangers, this trust is not directed toward people, communities, or sacred values. It is directed toward money itself. As we move from money to the idea of empires, you might wonder whether an empire is nothing more than a harmful system. To understand that, you and I need to see what defines an empire in the first place. An empire has two important features. First, it rules over a significant number of different peoples, each with their own culture and their own territory. Second, its borders are flexible and its ambitions are endless. This cultural diversity and territorial fluidity help empires unify many ethnic groups and many regions under one political system. They bring together many branches of our species that would otherwise remain separated. An empire does not always rise through violent conquest. The Athenian Empire, for example, began as a voluntary alliance. An empire also does not need to be ruled by a single authoritarian emperor. Britain, the largest empire in human history, was governed through a democratic system. Size is also not what determines whether a country is an empire. At its peak, Athens was far smaller than modern Mexico. Yet Athens was an empire, while Mexico today is not. For more than 2,500 years, empires have been the most common political structure on Earth. They have been relatively stable, and most rebellions were suppressed. When empires fall, it usually happens because of internal divisions among the ruling class or because of invasions from the outside. And even then, the collapse of one empire does not mean that the people under its rule suddenly become free. What usually happens is that a new empire rises to fill the power vacuum left behind. Building and maintaining an empire has always required brutal actions. It involves massacres, the killing of large populations, and harsh oppression of the survivors. But this does not mean that empires are only dark and destructive. If we deny the legacies left by empires, we would be throwing away most of human culture. Many cultural achievements came partly from resources taken from conquered peoples. Without the wealth that the Mughals extracted from their Indian subjects, we would not have the breathtaking beauty of the Taj Mahal. Besides gathering many small cultures into a larger one, empires also actively spread culture. This makes their rule easier and helps them legitimize actions that might otherwise be questioned, such as taxation, military service, or the worship of an emperor. The cultural ideas that empires spread are rarely created by the ruling elites alone. Instead, they are a mix of ideas, values, and traditions from many places. By the time we enter the 21st century, nationalism begins to lose its strength. Global problems arise that no sovereign nation can solve on its own. Climate change is just one example. Countries must open themselves to the machinery of the global market, to the influence of global corporations, to international organizations, to the pressure of world opinion, and to international courts. As we leave the topic of empires behind, you and I can move into the way religions understand the world. Religion is a system of values and norms that is built on faith in a supernatural order. After more than 2,000 years of being shaped by monotheistic thinking, most people in the West see polytheism as primitive or childish. But that is an unfair judgment. Polytheism does not concern itself with the desires or worries of daily life. That is why it makes no sense to ask these gods for health, rain, or victory in war. In polytheistic thought, the only meaningful reason to approach the highest power of the universe is to let go of desire and accept the good and the bad, success and failure, poverty and sickness, and even death itself. This is why some Hindus try to see that human desires and fears are temporary and meaningless. Understanding polytheism allows people to be tolerant of many religions. It encourages them to accept the power of other gods and not persecute those with different beliefs. Even when polytheistic civilizations such as Egypt, Rome, or the Aztecs conquered large territories, they did not try to convert their subjects. They did not send missionaries, and they did not send armies to distant lands just to spread their religion. Over time, some polytheists grew so devoted to a single protective god that they slowly separated themselves from traditional polytheism. They believed their chosen god had the highest power. They believed this god had personal preferences and could be convinced through negotiation. This shift eventually gave birth to monotheism, and believers of these religions often prayed for healing, wealth, and victory in conflicts. When we talk about ancient religions, you and I also need to look at how polytheism gave rise to dualistic belief systems. These traditions accepted the existence of two opposing forces. One stood for good, and the other stood for evil. Dualism taught that the entire universe is a battleground where these two forces constantly confront each other. What made dualism so compelling was that it offered a simple and direct answer to questions that every one of us has wondered about. Why does evil exist? Why is there suffering? And why do bad things happen to good people? The explanation was clear. Without the presence of evil, humans would never have to choose between good and bad, and without that choice, we would have no free will. Another important idea in dualism was the sharp distinction between body and soul, or between matter and spirit. In this view, every person was the arena where a noble soul fought against a flawed and impure body. This strict separation of soul and body helped later monotheistic religions address the problem of evil. In the end, it laid the intellectual foundation for both Christianity and Islam. The ideas of heaven as the kingdom of God and hell as the realm of the devil grew directly from this belief. Even though these religions differed in many ways, the faith systems we have discussed so far all placed their trust in gods or other supernatural beings. But around the 1st century before the Common Era, something very different happened. Several traditions began to reject the authority of gods. In India, Jainism and Buddhism developed this way. In China, Taoism and Confucianism followed the same direction. In the West, Stoicism, skepticism, and Epicureanism also took shape. These traditions taught that the world was governed by natural laws rather than the will of any divine being. Some of them continued to recognize gods, but those gods were seen as expressions of natural principles instead of personal beings with human-like intentions. Buddhism is a good example. It accepts a universal law much like a scientific law of nature. The law states that suffering arises from craving, and the only path to freedom is to release yourself entirely from craving. If you no longer cling to desire, you will no longer experience suffering. This way of thinking did not depend on a god who rewarded or punished. It relied on cause and effect. When you and I look at history as a whole, it becomes clear that the purpose of studying it is not to predict the future. History does not work like physics or economics, where precise forecasts are sometimes possible. We turn to history to broaden our understanding. It helps us realize that the world we live in today is not fixed or natural. It is not the only way things could have turned out. And once we see that, we understand that we have far more options than we usually imagine. As we move from ancient religions to the rise of modernity, we step into a period shaped by the scientific revolution, imperial expansion, and rapid economic growth. For most of human existence, people were surprisingly pessimistic about their own abilities. Across thousands of years, many individuals doubted that humans could understand the world on their own. Instead, they placed their hopes in powerful gods or spiritual forces. They believed these divine beings controlled the course of every human life. Because of that belief, many people did not try to explore the unknown or search for new scientific ideas. They did not ask how the world worked or how life could improve. The safest approach, in their minds, was to sit still and wait for destiny. But everything began to shift in the 16th and 17th centuries. This change did not come suddenly, but it grew stronger with every passing decade. A wave of scientific discoveries spread across Europe. People began to ask new questions. Instead of waiting for divine intervention, they asked how they could improve their own lives and the societies around them by using reason, investigation, and evidence. Once people embraced scientific methods such as observation, experimentation, and careful testing, they made astonishing gains in nearly every field of knowledge. Medicine advanced. Astronomy transformed our understanding of the cosmos. Physics uncovered principles that shaped modern technology. These discoveries made society healthier, safer, and more livable. Take child mortality, for example. Before science reshaped medicine and public health, even wealthy families often lost most of their children. Out of 10 or 15 births, only 3 or 4 children reached adulthood. Today, the average rate of infant mortality is roughly 1 in 1,000. This change alone reflects how scientific thinking has improved human life. The pursuit of science also produced enormous economic benefits, and European governments quickly noticed this. Monarchs realized that supporting scientific research could strengthen their nations. With royal backing, explorers and scholars set out to find new routes, new resources, and new ideas that could expand wealth and power. One of the most famous examples was when the King of Castile funded Christopher Columbus. Backed by the crown, Columbus set out across the Atlantic and reached the Americas. In return for supporting this exploration, the king gained control over a vast new empire full of valuable resources such as gold, silver, and rich mineral deposits. When you and I look at the rise of European exploration, another example stands out. The British government sent James Cook to explore the South Pacific. His voyages opened the path that eventually brought Britain to the vast and beautiful lands of Australia and New Zealand. These journeys expanded Britain's influence and gave it access to territories filled with resources, opportunities, and strategic advantages. No matter which European power we look at, their economies grew as a direct result of exploration combined with scientific innovation. Yet there is a tragic side to this story. The wealth and prosperity that Europeans gained often came at the expense of the indigenous people whose lands they entered. Hundreds of ancient civilizations were destroyed. Sacred sites were damaged or erased. Indigenous communities were oppressed, killed, or forced into slavery. The cost of European progress was paid by those who never sought these encounters. As we continue moving forward, you and I can see how this expansion tied directly into the rise of capitalism and the imperial mindset that shaped European societies. Earlier, we explored how European governments used scientific methods to strengthen their nations and expand their reach. This approach proved incredibly powerful. By the 19th century, the British Empire controlled nearly half of the world's landmass. With influence on such a massive scale, European nations spread their values and norms across almost every region on the planet. Local customs, cultural practices, and traditional laws were gradually replaced by systems built on European standards. Western religion, Western ideas of democracy, and Western science became dominant. Even though these empires eventually faded and lost political power, the cultural impact they left behind remained strong. Today, the most widespread global cultural force is capitalism. Because European empires ruled over so many territories, people across the world came to accept the importance and power of money. Whether you live in Brazil or Bhutan, Canada or Cambodia, modern life revolves around income, material possessions, and the pursuit of wealth. You and I both know that people everywhere try to increase their earnings and express their social status through clothing, accessories, and other luxuries. The influence of capitalism has been so powerful that it has blurred many cultural and religious boundaries. Modern science also played a major role in this change. For example, people once believed that God created the world in 7 days. Today, most of us accept the theory of evolution by natural selection. We understand that humans, like all other species, developed gradually over tens of thousands of years. As religious certainty weakened, capitalist ideology stepped forward to fill the gap. Instead of waiting for happiness in an afterlife and accepting suffering as something that ends only with death, many of us now focus on satisfying our needs in the present moment, here on Earth. This shift encourages people to search for new products, new services, and new experiences. It drives us to trade more, consume more, and constantly seek things that promise to make life happier. This change in mindset leads us to an important point. Human society has never been more peaceful than it is in the era of globalization. Even though globalization is a subject that sparks arguments, and even though many people complain that it erases cultural diversity and makes the world feel uniform or dull, it still brings a remarkable benefit. It makes the world safer. Modern nations depend on one another to build prosperity. In a globalized world, trade networks and investment systems stretch across many different countries. Because of that, a war or major disruption in one region can create economic pain everywhere. This interconnected reality gives countries a powerful incentive to avoid large-scale conflict. Peace becomes more profitable than war. As a result of this global interdependence, leaders across Europe, Asia, and the Americas have become extremely careful and active in maintaining peace. Their caution and cooperation have produced real progress. Since 1945, no nation has invaded or colonized another. When you and I look back at the horrific violence and massive losses that the world suffered during the Second World War, it becomes clear how peaceful and stable the globalized world has become in comparison. That is why the 20th century stands out as the most peaceful century so far. It may sound surprising at first, but when we look at history, we see that human societies have been trying for thousands of years to turn away from violence. Long before agriculture, in the era when humans lived only by hunting and gathering, researchers estimate that about 30% of adult men died because of murder, whether intentional or accidental. In modern societies, only about 1% of adult men die from violence. When you compare these numbers, you can clearly see the progress humanity has made. So why are we so peaceful now? It is because the social hierarchies and organized structures that formed after the agricultural revolution pushed people to follow rules that restricted killing and violence. These systems created stability and harmony within communities and supported the growth of economies. Structured societies encouraged cooperation and punished destructive behavior, which helped decrease the rate of violent death. Even though we live in the most peaceful era in history, we cannot afford to become careless. We must stay alert to potential conflicts. If the world were to experience another global war, the consequences would be unimaginable. You and I have a shared responsibility. We need to appreciate the peace we have and remind ourselves constantly that we must work together to protect it. As we approach the end of our journey through the history of Homo sapiens, it becomes important to reflect on what all of this means for our personal well-being. Our story has taken us across 300,000 years, from the grasslands of East Africa to the fully connected and intertwined modern world. Along the way, we have looked at the major trends in human development. Yet we have not talked much about what all of this means for each of us as individuals. Even though our health, wealth, and knowledge have increased dramatically, you and I still have to ask a difficult question. Are we actually happier? Sadly, on a personal level, the answer seems to be no. But why is that? Research based on psychological studies, surveys, and long-term observations shows that while our emotions rise and fall in the short term, our overall level of happiness tends to stay within a stable range over the long run. For example, if you lose your job, you will feel miserable, and it may seem like the suffering will last forever. Your happiness level will drop sharply. But as time passes and you adjust to your new situation, your happiness gradually returns to its usual level. In the long term, most people return to the emotional baseline they had before the crisis. When we look back at history, you and I can see similar patterns. During the French Revolution, many peasants felt an overwhelming sense of happiness after gaining freedom and independence. But not long after that great event, almost all of them stopped feeling that joy. Instead, they turned their attention back to something far more ordinary. They worried about next year's harvest and whether their crops would survive. It seems that Homo sapiens have long maintained a balance between contentment and despair. This balance kept our ancestors from being destroyed by tragedy, but it also kept them from becoming so satisfied that they would stop striving for something better. Because of that balance, our personal level of happiness has probably not increased over time. Yet when we shift our focus from individuals to society as a whole, you and I might wonder whether we are now happier as a collective. With all the improvements in quality of life, it feels natural to think that we are. The truth is more complicated because the answer depends on who you are. Most of the wealth created by human societies ended up in the hands of a small number of wealthy and powerful white people. Outside that group, most indigenous tribes, women, and people of color received very little of the progress they helped create. Again and again, they became the victims of imperialism and capitalism. Only in the modern era have they slowly begun to regain some measure of justice. As we move from the past toward the future, you and I have to ask what will happen next. Scientific progress and rising prosperity raise a new set of questions. Where will these powerful forces lead us? The hints lie in what scientists are currently discovering and developing. Researchers today are making extraordinary advances in biotechnology and in efforts to slow or even reverse aging. In the field of biological technology, the boundary between humans and machines is gradually fading. Scientists have achieved breakthroughs that once sounded impossible. One well-known example is Jesse Sullivan, an electrician in the United States who lost both of his arms. Scientists built a pair of robotic arms for him that he can control through his thoughts and nervous system. These arms move because they connect directly to his remaining biological signals. Scientists are also making progress in the battle against aging. They have discovered methods to extend the lifespan of certain organisms by altering their genes. For instance, they successfully duplicated the lifespan of a type of worm through genetic modification. They have even come close to achieving similar results in mice. That leads to an astonishing question. How long will it be before scientists can intervene in the human gene system and make us immortal? Both the search for immortality and the rise of biological technology are part of what some call the Gilgamesh Project. This project represents the human attempt to achieve eternal life, a task once reserved for gods. Yet despite these ambitions, scientists still face major legal and ethical barriers. These barriers restrict how far research can go. Still, those barriers may not last forever. If humanity ever discovers a clear path to extreme longevity, you and I know that people will not hesitate to push past anything that stands in the way. If that happens, a time may come when Homo sapiens radically transform their bodies through scientific and technological breakthroughs. When that day arrives, we may no longer be the species we are today. Instead, we may become something entirely new, part biological and part mechanical. It is also possible that a new species of superhumans will emerge. The question is not whether it will happen, but when. As we approach the end of this journey, you and I can step back and reflect on what it means. Homo sapiens began as an ordinary animal focused only on survival in Africa. Over time, we turned ourselves into the rulers of the planet and the greatest threat to the ecosystem. Now, with access to powers that once belonged only to gods, we hold in our hands the ability to create and to destroy. In the last few decades, we have finally made real progress in reducing hunger, disease, and war. But even as we enjoy these achievements, a deeper question remains. Are we reducing the suffering that exists in the world? Are we bringing peace to the other creatures who share this planet with us, while we continue to pursue our own comfort?